My name is James Johnson Perkins. Hello, and I'm from the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, and this is my keynote speech for today. I am a module convener for art and design subjects at UNNC, and I'm also an academic lead for the history of and social science subjects within the Centre of English Language Education. Presently, I'm speaking from Folkestone in Kent, and this is in the UK. And I would like to welcome you all to this international conference on teaching and education and learning, TERA, which is the Teaching, Education and Research Association. As you know, this was meant to take place in Seoul, South Korea on the 19th and 20th of May, but it's now taking place completely online, which leads me to my keynote topic, bracing for the storm, online versus face-to-face, I've called this. So, bracing for the storm. In the introduction for Creativity and Critique in Online Learning by Jacqueline Baxter et al., it says, can online study really replicate the challenges and occasional joy of learning in a face-to-face environment? Can it foster relationships in the same way, not only learner to learner, but equally between teacher to teacher? So I thought this was an interesting question. Can online learning achieve the type of transformational learning and that traditionally took place at residential schools and face-to-face tutorials? I will come back to this at the end of the speech. So, let's begin. I received an email at the end of February, and I'm sure you probably all may have received similar emails. It was a very scary email, It said, I hope you are healthy and well, wherever you are. We will start online teaching on the 2nd of March, and all module conveners, faculty, officers should have contacted the students regarding the new delivery format and outline in terms of teaching over the next 4 weeks. And this could be longer. It turned out to be 10 weeks, the whole semester. Please remember, the most important thing is to keep it simple, effective, and as interactive as you can. So, as you're all aware, we have this virus, COVID-19, and I would just like to say here, I hope you're all healthy and well, because this has been a very scary thing for lots of people. And it's meant a lot of change, hence this is why I changed my keynote speech to a different subject. But I hope you're all happy, and I hope you're all well, and I hope you're all safe in these very interesting times. Anyway, let's get back to the email. The email said, at the end, please remember the most important thing is to keep it simple, effective, and as interactive as you can. Actually, this was the greatest advice that I could have received, keeping it simple. So I had 2 weeks to develop online materials for 2 modules. And before this, I had very little prior training in developing online materials. I was terrified. The email continued, do contact IT service desk or email e-learning support if you encounter any challenges. In the following weeks, IT became a very good friend. I very rarely used IT before this semester, and now I use it very regularly. Soon I would, through praxis, know what being an online teacher was and what it was like, and I'm going to tell you here what it was like for me. In Measurements in Distance Learning, an interesting book by Amy J. Catalano, it says in the introduction, student engagement is essential to the success in online courses. without being engaged, students can feel isolated and disconnected. Engagement in learning environments is characterized by the extent to which students actively engage in thinking, talking, and interacting with the content of a course, and the other students on the course and the instructor. So this is a very different scenario if we're using online teaching. So this is very much what I had in mind when I started developing at the beginning of this process my own series of pros and cons to think about online teaching. So what are the pros and cons of online teaching? Well, I'll give you some of my experience and my ideas about the pros and cons. So these are the pros. Students can learn at home. So all lectures and materials could be online via online platforms, so students can easily access them from the comfort of their homes. So this is another good solution, as many students now were not being able to leave their homes because of COVID-19. So everyone in China, where my students were based, well, most of my students, is now in lockdown. So this was definitely the best option to use online teaching, as my students could attend my new online courses from anywhere that the internet had access for. So I knew I could carry on teaching what I was teaching using the internet. And they could participate wherever they were, and they could also use mobile phones. As you know, students love mobile phones. I like this idea of the world as a classroom. I really like this idea. I could teach students anywhere they were. As well as in China, I now had students in Mauritius, UK, India, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. So I had students from all over the world. And online teaching, obviously, is ideal for this situation. Flexible scheduling. Online students can choose between a variety of scheduling options. They could be self-paced, and I could set up real-time situations as well to guide students through the materials. So because of this, I learned how to use Zoom, I learned how to make PowerPoint shows, and I learned how to set up Moodle forums, and which I had used before, but now they were much more relevant and used in a much more consistent way. I could develop more online reading materials. I enjoyed this aspect, as I figured as I wasn't there to teach them in China, they could at least read more about the subjects I was teaching them. So in this regard, I did a lot of research into my subject that I hadn't done before, and found lots of online materials and lots of interesting articles and websites that I could guide my students towards, which they didn't have this information before. So this was a really good part of this time off to develop these online courses. Okay, so what are the cons? What were some of the problems that I had? Well, I soon realised that online courses are actually harder to run, as they require a certain amount of chat rooms, message boards and other virtual classroom assignments to make up for the fact that they're not in class. I also needed my assignments to be up to par with what's typically expected in a comparable campus-based course. Office hours and online delivery in the mornings from a small room with poor internet. This was problematic. I soon, however, learned how to set up Wi-Fi repeaters all over the house where I was staying, so that internet could at least reach where I could work and I had a private space to work in. Time differences. This was a big problem. Oh dear, now my students are 7 hours ahead of me. So I had to coordinate my things with this difference in mind. And assessment handing times had to be using a time that they could understand in all time zones. And Zoom lessons and Skype appointments for me had to be in the morning, but for my students had to be in the afternoon or the evening. So this aspect really changed in terms of time zones. Students were on their own. I was really aware that the students were now in lockdown. They were probably having lots of struggles, dealing with lots of complicated issues from what was happening. By doing personal tutorials, I realised also that the students will now find it harder to organise their time management, and they were also finding that they were procrastinating more. Also, students were now often misunderstanding instructions much more, because obviously they were reading the instructions and they didn't have as much face-to-face time to ask questions. This meant instructions had to be very simple, so going back to keeping it simple, and there had to be much more material online for them so they could understand what they were learning, or what the classes were, or assessments or tasks. In China, a lot of the internet is closed, so there were also problems with students not being able to watch online videos that I wanted them to watch, and also various websites that I wanted them to find information from. Therefore, videos had to be downloaded on the university site and embedded into the materials that were sent to students. And large sections of text were cut and pasted from websites, but also the links were given at the same time. The students couldn't get materials. Now, I teach art and design, so my students were doing art and design lessons, so sometimes they were unable to get materials, for example, to build 3D things, which was part of my lessons. So I had to allow for this by allowing them to use materials they could find: cereal boxes, toilet rolls. One of the 3D projects was also modified so they didn't have to have specific materials, and they could make more open-ended artworks instead, using materials that they could find around the house. So I had to adapt lessons, and this was very interesting, and actually I think it made me think a lot about different ways of teaching the materials that I normally teach. Also, there were many problems with the software. Zoom didn't always work. I had to often turn off the video so students could hear me talking, because the internet wasn't working before. Things like passwords were not sent when I thought they were. There was often lagging on Skype, and Skype not working. Students could also not watch large files like videos on my Moodle, so I had to develop PowerPoint shows instead, which were smaller, using audio. And it was also a bit strange recording these, because I was in a small room at the end of a house, and here I was recording these videos on my own. It felt a bit strange, but I did it, and now it doesn't feel so strange. Flexible scheduling. Well, in theory, that could be good, but for the student, as I said before, some of the students struggled with this, but for me, flexible scheduling meant that I would be working almost 12 hours a day and 7 days a week. The reason for this is developing online materials is very time consuming. Communication skills are critical, and I felt that the students might miss out also on meeting friends. There was a lot of online correspondence between me and students, including virtual study groups, and the students will obviously thrive on social aspects of the campus experience, which they were missing out on now. And especially students transitioning from high school, I think they did find these online courses sometimes a bit isolating. One way I dealt with this on my modules is by having an online study partner. I got them to match up with other students on their course so they could talk to each other online about what they were doing and help each other. So this was a form of peer review, which was different from my group reviews that I had before, but I think it worked very well. I personally missed having direct contact with the students and found that the distance restrictions very frustrating. Students also complained in their tutorials and their early module feedback that they weren't getting enough teacher contact. So because of this, I made sure that there were regular Zoom question and answer sessions, but I wish I had started this earlier, because I didn't realise this at the beginning of the semester. So let me give you some conclusions and what I learned. So I learned lots of new software: Zoom, Teams, doing PowerPoint shows, using OneNote. My Moodle looks wonderful now. It's got a beautiful memory, a beautiful menu, and it's very easy and simple to go through. And there's lots of information on there, and there's lots of new ways here that I've used to communicate with the students. The work that the student have made, the work that they've made on my course, is definitely on a par with what they've done before. So I've done the midterm assessments, and it's definitely on a par. Much of the work is even better than before. So I can truly say that this online course is working in terms of the objectives were met of the modules that I was teaching. Normally, I don't like early module feedback because I think students they have to do so much feedback on courses, but this time it was really, really useful. So I want to talk a little bit about my early module feedback, what the students replied to me. So they were asking a series of questions like the materials, were the materials of sufficient quality to assist learning? Were the materials clear about what was expected? Were you given sufficient opportunity to interact with your teachers on this Moodle? Was the overall experience of learning this module online motivating for you? So these are questions that were given to students. The vast majority of my students have either agreed or strongly agreed relating to these questions. So they were very happy with these aspects. So they thought that there was sufficient quality, the materials were good, and they got enough time to interact with me, which surprised me, and the overall experiences was helping them to learn. So it would seem that regarding the online materials, it was working well. Personally, from looking through my midterm assessment materials, I'm really happy that they were responding positively to this in this early module feedback, and I was also extremely happy that the work that they made had really responded well to the changes that they'd been through and the way the module was delivered. So why did I call this talk Bracing for the Storm? Well, I think because when I was given this email at the beginning of this semester, I really felt like I had to prepare for calamity because I didn't really know what was going to happen. And I also found myself stuck in the UK, and I was meant to be teaching in China. So there was a lot of change, and I really felt like I had to sort of prepare for sort of a storm that was coming. But also, I think it's really interesting that we should all really be prepared for these eventualities that might happen again. You know, we live in an uncertain world, and perhaps we should, and we can now, because we have a bit more experience, develop online materials in case something like this happens again. So in the same book, Creativity and Critique of Online Learning by Jacqueline Baxter et al., she reflects, online teaching, when viewed in terms of the long history of teaching and pedagogy, is still in its infancy. We are still developing language to talk about it, examining new ways to promote its development, and still in many ways we are resistant to the thought that it may eventually replace face-to-face teaching. Personally, I think the important thing here is we should be prepared for eventualities like this and see the positives in the possibilities of online learning. We should use these moments to reflect that there are lots of possibilities also here for future research and for thinking about how we can teach our modules in different ways, using things like blended learning, so having more information online that they can use within their classes and activities that are using technology that they can use within the classroom environment. After all, that's what we teachers are. You know, we are researchers. We're teachers and researchers here, and that's what we do. That's why we've agreed to do this conference. So I'll finish. Do I think that online teaching was for me? Well, I would have to say yes and no. It's definitely made me think more about blended learning and thinking about the other materials that the students have online that they can use as well as face-to-face teaching. I want to develop more online reading materials, as I said before, and more online materials in conjunction with face-to-face to help improve lessons. One of the things that I had on my module was a really nice little, well, I thought it was very nice, a little talk on critical thinking, which was a PowerPoint show. I think things like this are really useful because they can keep looking again and again at these same things, whereas before they would just have a lecture and they might forget materials in this lecture. So you can make mini lectures that back up the lectures that you do and mini talks on things that are important within their modules. And now, just to say, well, I'm an online keynote speaker. Now, that's an unusual thing, isn't it? Because I was going to be a keynote speaker, but now I'm an online keynote speaker. And this is an online conference, but that's another discussion. So I'll finish by saying enjoy the conference, and let's not let this change the restriction that we ourselves may have here. This is still a great opportunity, so please watch each other's excellent and interesting talks and lectures and papers, as there's lots of very interesting research here, and you're all very, very interesting teachers and researchers and lecturers, and I myself am very looking forward very much to seeing these online deliveries. And now, as I said to my students at the end of every online activity now, if you have any questions, please send me an email or you can contact me via Skype. Goodbye and enjoy the conference. Thank you very much.